David and Jonathan were a pair of rollicking roller skates. They were brothers, of course, and they were as fine and as fast as any pair of skates you've ever seen. Their mother had named them David and Jonathan in the fond hope that they would be like David and Jonathan in the Bible and go everywhere together very nicely. But before they could do that, someone would have to buy them. You see, they were brand new roller skates, and they were so new to this world of cement sidewalks and hard pavements that their ball-bearing wheels had yet to learn the thrill of rushing wildly around the block with some energetic boy or girl. One happy day somebody would buy them, but until then, David and Jonathan had to live in a toy shop window. There were many other toys, so they couldn't possibly be lonely. There were lots of toys that could be wound up and set to running. And there was a great chubby doll who could say, "Mama," when she was bent in the middle. There was a whole army of tin soldiers who marched boldly across a play table, and a family of jacks in the box who could leap into the air. There was a music box, and a pile of blocks, and a drum, and some storybooks. And up on the wall there was a clock with a cuckoo who popped out every hour on the hour to say what time it was. In the midst of all this splendor stood David and Jonathan with their skate key hanging between them. Now that skate key was the one thing they owned in all the world, and it was a very valuable possession. A pair of skates without a key is like a pair of shoes without laces, or a bottle of ink without a pen, or anything else that is completely worthless by itself. That skate key was a blessing in disguise, but David and Jonathan were such young and rollicking roller skates that they wouldn't have recognized a blessing if it crept right up and bit them. They treated their skate key as an unimportant plaything and thought no more about it. David and Jonathan stood in the toy shop window with their blunt little noses practically butted together, and the skate key hung between them on a bit of string. Every now and again the shopkeeper would reach into the window to get something, and he would jostle things about in such a way that the skate key would swing back and forth, tapping David and then Jonathan on the nose. They thought it was sort of a game, and it always made them giggle and snicker. There was no real harm in that, of course, but more than ever it made them think that their skate key was an unimportant plaything. Perhaps if they had stood side by side, which is the proper way for pairs of shoes and skates and candlesticks to stand, they might have felt differently about their skate key. But if they had felt differently, there wouldn't have been a story to tell. One fine morning, the shopkeeper shoved back the sliding pane of glass and reached into the window. The key began to swing back and forth, tapping David and Jonathan on the nose, whereupon they both began to giggle and snicker. But the shopkeeper didn't notice that. He reached right in to take hold of Jonathan, who was giggling so hard that he butted his nose smack against David and sent him rolling backwards across the toy shop window. The giggling David had backed into a pyramid of wooden alphabet blocks, and they came crashing down like a storm of hailstones. One of them bounced off the head of the doll, making her topple over frontwards, crying, "Mama!" as she fell across the play table on which the army of tin soldiers marched. The fearless tin soldiers took to their heels and jumped off the edge of the table, bounced on the head of a toy drum, and went flying in all directions and into all sorts of mischief. The shopkeeper tried to catch all of his precious toys to keep them from being scratched or damaged, but his best effort only made matters worse. In the twinkling of an eye, the mainsprings of the mechanical toys were unwinding, the jack-in-the-boxes were escaping, and the whole window was in such a furious state of commotion that the cuckoo in the clock came out to see what was going on 5 minutes before he should have. The shopkeeper fished about in the jumble of toys and hauled out David and Jonathan. "Here they are," said the shopkeeper, "the finest pair of roller skates in my store." By now they were standing side by side on the counter, David on the right and Jonathan on the left, just as they should be. The customer was a grave little boy with big round eyes and a very determined chin. He looked at David and Jonathan very solemnly, for buying a pair of skates is a serious business that requires a great deal of thought. Finally he said, "They're very nice skates, but they haven't got any skate key." "How wise you are, little boy," said the shopkeeper. A pair of skates without a key is worse than no skates at all. Yes, sir, the skate key is much more important than the skates. Now you just wait till I find the key." "Did you hear that?" whispered David. "He says that tinkling, troublesome, swinging key is more important than we are." "Of course, I knew that," said Jonathan, fibbing outrageously. "After all, the key always hung closer to me than he did to you. He's quite devoted to me. But when we get out into the world of cement sidewalks and hard pavement, I'll lend him to you now and again if you like." "Well, I like that," said David. "You will lend the key to me. Why, that key is as much mine as yours. In fact, that key is really mine, because I'm the right skate, and the right skate is always right no matter what." Just then the shopkeeper came back with the key. He tied it very carefully to David's leather ankle strap and said, "There now, I guess that settles that. 2 skates, 1 key." "I guess that does settle that," said David. "It's quite obviously my key." "It's mine," said Jonathan. But before the argument could get any more unpleasant, they were nicely wrapped in a bit of brown paper, tied up with a bit of string, and carried out of the toy shop into the world of cement sidewalks and hard pavement. Before very long, David and Jonathan found themselves tightly fastened to the feet of the grave little boy with the big round eyes and the very determined chin, and they were rolling a little cautiously up and down the sidewalk in front of his house. The skate key hung about the little boy's neck, and that should have settled the argument once and for all. But David and Jonathan were both being very unsportsmanlike and behaving abominably to one another. Worse than that, they had absolutely no consideration for the grave little boy with the big round eyes and the very determined chin. So long as David and Jonathan ran side by side, just sort of coasting, everything was all right. But the minute that one or the other got a little bit in front, then there was real trouble. If David nosed ahead, Jonathan would try to outdo him, and before the little boy could figure out what was happening, their antics would have him dancing something like a Highland fling, which always ended with a good big bump, as feet, David and Jonathan went flying up in the air, and the seat of the little boy's trousers smacked down on the world of cement sidewalks and hard pavement. Every time this happened, David and Jonathan would bounce right off the little boy's shoes, and the skate key would have to be hauled out to readjust them. The minute that skate key came in sight, the argument would begin all over again. Each time it was just a little more unpleasant than before, and each time the little boy's determined chin became just a little more determined. As he turned the key to make David and Jonathan clamp securely to his shoes, he would mutter, "I will learn how to manage these skates. I will, even if it takes me till I'm 105 years old, I will." Little boys are usually much stronger and much brighter than even the shiniest and best pair of new roller skates, so it wasn't very long until this little boy forced David and Jonathan to skate along very nicely. First Jonathan and then David would glide out, and when they skated properly, it was just like a game in which they tossed the weight of the little boy back and forth between them. It was really fun, but David and Jonathan were still being so selfish and jealous over the skate key that they pretended to be having a dismal time, and they never missed a chance to get all mixed up so that the boy would begin his hippity-hoppity Highland fling and finally fall with a thump on the sidewalk. All of this hippity-hoppity Highland fling business was very discouraging and really rather silly, because David and Jonathan were missing all of the fun that belongs to a pair of rollicking roller skates. Having your own way isn't worth all that, but David and Jonathan weren't wise enough to realize that. They just skated along willy-nilly, preferring to be stubborn rather than to be having fun. Then came a great day when there was much talk about a race, a relay race. The very sound of it thrilled David and Jonathan, and of course they were anxious to be in the race. The little boy fetched them out of the house, and as he was clamping them onto his shoes, David and Jonathan forgot their disagreement long enough to ask the skate key all about the race and if they were going to be in it. Not at all, said the Key. This is a relay race in which a team of 4 boys and 4 pairs of skates race against 4 other boys and 4 other pairs of skates. That means that everybody, skates and boys, must work together very nicely. Teamwork is the important thing, and you two are so stupid you wouldn't know anything about teamwork. Oh, but we'll learn, said David and Jonathan. No, you won't, said the Key. You can't even share a skate key between you without quarreling, so how could you be on a team and behave properly? It takes time and practice and a lot of other things that you never thought of. But you might if you start right now. David and Jonathan looked a little bit sheepish, but they started right then and there to make their skating as smooth as the frosting on a cake. I wish I could say that they went into the race and won it, but they didn't. They were much too busy learning that when they skate it must be first Jonathan, then David, Jonathan, David, Jonathan, David, left, then right, each in turn until they reach the proper speed where they can coast along just as gaily and happily as any other pair of rollicking roller skates in the whole wide world of cement sidewalks and hard, hard pavement.